The military jeep's engine roared to life for the first time in decades, echoing through the dusty barn. 17-year-old Ethan Miller froze, wrench still in hand, as headlights swept across the weathered walls. Outside, vehicle doors slammed. Heavy boots crunched on gravel, through gaps in the wooden planks. He saw them, uniformed men surrounding the barn, weapons visible. Ethan had spent weeks secretly restoring the abandoned jeep he'd found buried under tarps. Now at dawn, stern-faced military commanders were closing in. The lead officer pounded on the door. "By order of the United States Army, open up." Before we dive into this story, I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below. New here? Hit subscribe for unexpected twists you won't see coming. Ethan Miller's alarm blared at 4:30 a.m. Another day, another fight to keep the failing family farm alive. At 17, his shoulders already carried the weight meant for a man twice his age. "Dad? Pills are on the table," he called, setting out his father's morning medication. Robert Miller grunted from his bedroom. The accident 2 years ago had left him with a traumatic brain injury, transforming a once brilliant mechanical engineer into a man who sometimes forgot his own son's name. Ethan gulped lukewarm coffee and headed out to milk their remaining dairy cows before school. Their farm had been shrinking, yearly equipment breaking down, fields lying fallow, and the bank's foreclosure notices piling up on the kitchen table. At school, Ethan's grease-stained hands and patched jeans made him an easy target. "Here comes Grease Monkey," smirked Tyler Jenkins, whose father owned half the town, still playing farmer while the rest of us planned for college. Ethan kept his head down. What was the point in explaining that college dreams died the day his father's tractor rolled, or that his hands were stained from fixing their ancient equipment with salvaged parts because they couldn't afford mechanics? After school, he worked at the feed store until sunset, then returned home to more chores. His only peace came late at night in their old barn, where he could tinker with engines by lantern light. The barn had always been his sanctuary, filled with his father's forgotten tools and discarded machinery. In the far corner sat something large, covered by weathered tarps. In the 2 years since his father's accident, Ethan had never bothered to look underneath. Until tonight, when everything would change. The spring storm hit without warning, tearing through the countryside with howling winds. Ethan raced to the barn when he heard the sickening crack of splintering wood. The old roof had partially collapsed, rain pouring through the new gap. He worked frantically, moving stored hay bales away from the deluge. As he pushed deeper into the barn's shadows, his shoulder caught the edge of the mysterious tarp-covered mass. The covering slipped, revealing olive-green metal underneath. Curiosity finally overtaking him, Ethan pulled the remaining tarps away. A military jeep sat before him, not some cheap civilian model, but an authentic World War II Willys MB, buried under decades of dust. The tires had rotted, rust consumed the body, and the canvas top had long since disintegrated. Yet something about its defiant presence, still standing after all these years, touched something in Ethan. He ran his hands over the faded white star on the hood. This machine had history. It had purpose. Someone had once depended on it, perhaps even owed their life to it. "Why would anyone just abandon you here?" he whispered. Flipping open his phone, Ethan checked the time, 11:30 p.m. He should sleep. Tomorrow meant early chores, school, work, more chores. His body ached for rest. Instead, he grabbed a shop rag and began wiping decades of grime from the dashboard. The next night, he returned with salvaged tools. The night after that, he brought a borrowed manual. Soon a ritual formed. After finishing his regular workload, Ethan would spend 2 precious hours with the Jeep. He had no money for parts. The farm needed every penny. He had no time to spare. He had no reason to restore a vehicle they couldn't use or sell. But something about saving this forgotten piece of history felt important, necessary, even. This wasn't about profit. This was about respect. It was about bringing something worthy back to life. 2 weeks into the restoration, Ethan entered Gus Wilson's hardware downtown. The bell jingled as he pushed open the door, drawing the attention of the elderly owner. "What can I help you with, young man?" Gus asked, watching Ethan scan the shelves. "Carburetor rebuild kit," Ethan replied. "Something that might fit a 1942 engine." Gus's eyebrows rose. 1942? Not many vehicles from that era still running around here. When Ethan explained about the military Jeep, something changed in the old man's expression. Gus disappeared into the back room, returning with a dusty box. "This might work. Old stock, but good quality." As Ethan counted out crumpled bills, Gus added, "You know this town sent over 60 men to serve in World War II. Only 47 came back." "I didn't know that," Ethan said. "Those Jeeps were the backbone of the army. Reliable, tough, like the men who drove them." Gus's eyes grew distant. "My brother survived Normandy because of a Jeep like yours. Driver got him to a field hospital after he took shrapnel." That night, Ethan cleaned deeper into the Jeep's frame, discovering stenciled numbers and military markings. He photographed each one, researching their meaning online at the school library during lunch. The vehicle identification plates revealed his barn treasure was no ordinary transport. This particular model had been modified for special operations, with reinforced components and unique mounting brackets for communications equipment. Ethan began finding small artifacts as he worked. A tarnished button, spent shell casings embedded in the frame, and behind the glove compartment, carved initials, JH. Word spread through town about Ethan's project. Mr. Peterson, from the gas station, offered discarded but usable hoses. Old Man Turner, who hoarded mechanical parts in his garage, contributed a set of gauges that Ethan couldn't possibly afford. Even Ethan's father had a moment of clarity, shuffling out to the barn one evening. "Good work on the ignition wiring," he said, startling Ethan. For a brief moment, the father who had taught him about engines had returned. "Keep the connections clean." The next day, as Ethan struggled to free a rusted bolt, a black luxury SUV pulled into their driveway. Harold Whitaker, the wealthiest landowner in the county, stepped out. He was the man who'd been trying to buy their failing farm for years. His arrival meant trouble. It always did. "Still hanging on to this worthless patch of dirt, I see," Whitaker said, his Italian shoes incongruous against the muddy farmyard. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "Can I help you, Mr. Whitaker?" "Just checking if your father has reconsidered my offer." His smile never reached his eyes. "The bank tells me the foreclosure is moving forward. Shame to see the Millers lose everything when I'm offering good money." "We're managing," Ethan replied stiffly. Whitaker's gaze drifted toward the open barn door. "What's that in there?" Before Ethan could stop him, Whitaker strode into the barn, circling the partially restored Jeep. Something flashed across his face. Recognition, then calculation. Interesting junk pile. "Military surplus?" His tone was casual, but his eyes hardened. "I'll give you 500 for it. Add it to my collection." "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale when you're broke, boy." Whitaker ran a manicured finger along the hood. "This heap isn't worth your time. Probably stolen government property anyway." "I said, it's not for sale." Whitaker's affable mask slipped. "Listen carefully. Your father's medical bills keep piling up. The bank's patience is running out. Be smart about this." After Whitaker left, Ethan returned to the Jeep, unsettled by the man's interest. Why would someone who bought and sold millions in real estate care about a rusted old vehicle? 2 days later, Ethan arrived home from school to find his father agitated. "Whitaker called," Robert Miller said, words slurring slightly. "Says we're thieves. Says that Jeep belongs to him through some property deal years ago." That night, Ethan doubled his efforts on the restoration, a gnawing sense of urgency driving him. Whatever the Jeep's story, Whitaker's interest meant it mattered. On Saturday morning, Ethan discovered the barn door hanging open. Inside, his tools lay scattered. The Jeep's newly cleaned components had been doused in used motor oil. On the windshield frame, someone had scratched, "Give up." Gus from the hardware store arrived as Ethan was surveying the damage. "Heard about the trouble," the old man said. "Brought you something." He handed over a small metal box. "Found this in storage. Belonged to a local veteran, Captain James Harrison. Thought his service records might interest you." Ethan accepted the box, not yet understanding how it would change everything. The metal box sat on Ethan's workbench, its military green surface worn with age. Inside, he found dog-tagged service records, medals, and yellowed photographs of soldiers posed beside Jeeps identical to his. One photo showed a handsome officer leaning against the vehicle. Written on the back, "Captain James Harrison, 2nd Rangers Battalion, France, 1944. Beneath the photos lay a leather-bound journal with coordinates, mission notes, and hand-drawn maps. Most entries were routine, but one passage caught Ethan's attention. June 14, 1944. Intercepted German convoy near Carentan. Recovered documents and artifacts of significant value. T involved again in black market dealings. Evidence secured in vehicle compartment, J7. Will report upon return." The entry was the last in the journal. Ethan returned to the Jeep, searching for anything marked J7. After hours of careful examination, he discovered a hidden compartment beneath the passenger seat, sealed shut with decades of rust. A sharp knock on the barn door startled him. "It's Gus," called the hardware store owner. "Got a minute?" The old man entered, his gaze immediately finding the open box of Harrison's belongings. "I see you've been reading," Gus said quietly. "There's more to the story." Gus lowered himself onto a hay bale. "I wasn't just a friend of Harrison's. I served with him. Different unit, but we trained together before shipping out." "Did you know about this Jeep?" Ethan asked. "Not at first, but I recognized the serial number in your photographs." Gus's weathered face grew solemn. "Harrison was investigating supply thefts. Good American equipment disappearing, showing up on the black market, made powerful enemies." "Including someone with the initial L?" Ethan asked. Gus's eyes narrowed. "Harold Whitaker served as a supply officer, came home mysteriously wealthy after the war. Never proven, but rumors followed him. That's why he wants the Jeep," Ethan realized. "There's evidence against him inside it. Evidence that never reached command because Harrison went missing. 2 days after that journal entry, they found his Jeep, abandoned weeks later." "But how did it end up in our barn?" Gus hesitated. "Your grandfather, Thomas Miller, was Harrison's driver. He recovered the Jeep after Harrison disappeared. Military recorded it as lost in action, but Thomas must have transported it home after the war." Ethan's mind reeled. His own grandfather, a man who died before Ethan was born, had hidden this vehicle, protected whatever secrets it contained. "There's more," Gus continued. "Whitaker faced a court-martial for black market activities, but key evidence vanished. He was acquitted, returned home, built his empire." That night, Ethan worked on the hidden compartment with renewed purpose. By dawn, he'd broken through, finding a waterproof pouch containing German transport manifests, photographs of stolen supplies, and a list of collaborators with Lieutenant H. Whitaker featured prominently. The evidence that had disappeared from Harrison's court-martial was here, protected for decades. Before Ethan could process this discovery, his father burst into the barn. "Bank called," Robert Miller said, voice tight with stress. "Final foreclosure notice. 30 days. 2 mornings later, Gus's daughter arrived at the farm, eyes red from crying. "Dad passed last night," she said. "Heart attack. He left instructions to give you this." She handed Ethan a sealed envelope. Inside was a key and a note. "Safe deposit box hash 447, First National Bank, password Normandy." The veterans are with you. That afternoon, Whitaker's lawyers delivered a formal claim of ownership for the Jeep, citing a 1946 property transaction that supposedly included all military equipment on the land. Ethan stood in the barn, surrounded by mounting obstacles, the farm slipping away, guests gone, legal threats piling up. And somewhere in town, a safe deposit box held answers he desperately needed. Rain poured as Ethan entered the bank, Gus's key clutched in his hand. The safe deposit box contained a single envelope, Captain Harrison's official military file, with records stamped classified and missing in action, presumed dead. The file detailed Harrison's last known mission, investigating military supply theft, and named Harold Whitaker as the prime suspect. Most disturbing was the final report. James Harrison's body had never been found. A newspaper clipping from 1947 showed the dedication of a memorial plaque in town. In the crowd stood a younger Harold Whitaker, his face a mask of false solemnity, and beside him, unmistakably, was Ethan's grandfather. When Ethan returned home, his father was having one of his bad days. "You're wasting time on that Jeep," Robert Miller said harshly. "Whitaker's lawyers called again. Says we're harboring stolen military property." "It's not stolen," Ethan protested. "Grandfather brought it home legally." "Grandfather?" His father's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about?" "Thomas Miller. Your father. He served with Captain Harrison." Robert Miller slammed his fist on the table. "My father never served with any Captain Harrison. He was stationed in the Pacific, not Europe." Ethan froze. "What?" "Thomas Miller never set foot in France. He fought in the Philippines, came home in '45. The foundation of Ethan's understanding crumbled. If his grandfather hadn't brought the Jeep home, who had? That night, sleep evaded him. Without Gus's guidance, with his father's memory unreliable, Ethan felt lost. The bank's foreclosure deadline loomed. His school grades were slipping. Dark circles had formed under his eyes from endless nights in the barn. For what? A mystery he couldn't solve. A vehicle that might bring more trouble than it was worth. The next morning, the local newspaper featured Harold Whitaker announcing a new development project on land that included the Miller farm. He'd already secured permits, assuming foreclosure was inevitable. At school, even the usual bullies seemed to pity Ethan's exhaustion. "Heard your dad's getting worse," said one classmate awkwardly. "And you're still messing with that old Jeep? What's the point?" The question echoed in Ethan's mind as he worked his shift at the feed store. What was the point? The farm was nearly lost. His father needed medical care they couldn't afford. College was a fading dream. He was sacrificing everything for a vehicle connected to a man his grandfather apparently never knew. That evening, Ethan sat in the barn, staring at the half-restored Jeep. For the first time in weeks, his tools remained untouched. "Maybe Whitaker's right," he whispered. "Maybe this is just junk." As rain drummed on the barn roof, Ethan considered giving up. Selling the Jeep to Whitaker might provide enough money for a few months' worth of his father's medication. He reached for his phone to call Whitaker when headlights swept across the barn wall. A mud-splattered pickup truck pulled up outside. An elderly man Ethan didn't recognize stepped out, followed by two others. All were in their 90s, moving slowly but purposefully through the rain. "You Ethan Miller?" the first man asked. "I'm Frank Davis. This is Joe Wilkins and Henry Peterson. We served with your grandfather's cousin, Jack Miller, and with James Harrison." "My grandfather's cousin?" "Jack brought that Jeep home when he returned to help your family after your grandfather died in the Philippines." Frank's eyes gleamed. "We've been watching you work on it. Gus told us you found Harrison's evidence. We've been waiting decades for this moment," Henry added. "We're here to help finish what Harrison started." Suddenly, Ethan wasn't alone anymore. The veterans became fixtures at the barn. Frank, despite arthritic hands, still remembered how to time an engine perfectly. Joe knew canvas work and helped replace the rotted top. Henry had been a mechanic and guided Ethan through the transmission rebuild. They brought parts scavenged from collectors and military surplus. More importantly, they brought stories. Harrison was the finest officer I ever served under, Frank explained as they worked. When supplies started disappearing, medicine, gasoline, weapons, he launched his own investigation. Whitaker was selling to civilians at 10 times the military price, added Joe. Harrison caught him, red-handed, in June of '44. What happened to Harrison? Ethan asked. The men exchanged glances. Officially, missing in action, Henry said carefully. Unofficially, many of us believed Whitaker arranged his disappearance. Word spread through the veterans community. A retired machinist fabricated impossible-to-find brackets. A collector donated original gauges. A widow brought her husband's preserved uniform, saying, "He'd want it displayed with the Jeep when you're finished." Meanwhile, Ethan made a discovery in the service records. Harrison had no children when he went missing, but his wife had been pregnant. The child, a son named Thomas Harrison, would now be in his 70s. Did anyone ever locate Harrison's son? Ethan asked the veterans. The military tried, Frank replied. His mother remarried, changed his name. He grew up not knowing his real father's story. As the Jeep neared completion, Ethan noticed unusual vehicles parked in town, government plates, men in civilian clothes, asking questions at the diner. The veterans were making phone calls from the hardware store that Gus's daughter now ran. One evening, a man in a press suit visited the barn. He identified himself only as Smith and photographed the Jeep and documents. Before leaving, he asked pointed questions about Whitaker and the evidence Ethan had found. Is the military investigating? Ethan asked Frank after the man left. Let's just say people in high places are finally listening, Frank answered. Harrison's case was never officially closed. With just days before the bank's foreclosure deadline, Whitaker made his move. His gleaming car pulled up to the farmhouse. This time, he brought a cashier's check. $50,000 for the Jeep, he said, placing the check on the kitchen table. Enough to stop foreclosure and keep your father in medication for years. My final offer. Ethan stared at the check. It was a way out. Immediate relief from the crushing pressure. I need your answer by morning, Whitaker said. Otherwise, I'll see you at the foreclosure auction. That night, Ethan faced the hardest decision of his life. Ethan sat beside the Jeep until midnight, turning the cashier's check over in his hands. $50,000 would save the farm. It would pay for his father's treatments. It represented security. All he had to do was hand over Harrison's Jeep, and with it, the evidence of Whitaker's crimes. The veterans had gone home hours ago. In the lantern light, shadows played across the vehicle they'd restored together. It gleamed now, every part functioning. The canvas top new, the olive green paint fresh. Ethan traced the white star on the hood. This wasn't just metal and rubber anymore. It was Captain Harrison's legacy. It was his grandfather's cousin Jack, bringing it home to preserve the truth. It was Gus's final mission. His phone buzzed with a text from Whitaker. Smart people take the money. Ethan's father appeared at the barn door, more lucid than he'd been in weeks. Dad, what are you doing up? Couldn't sleep. Robert Miller surveyed the restored Jeep. It's magnificent. Whitaker offered $50,000 for it. His father nodded slowly. I know, would solve our problems. Ethan waited for the inevitable instruction to take the money. Instead, his father sat beside him. Your grandfather died fighting for what he believed in, Robert said quietly. His cousin Jack brought this home because some truths shouldn't stay buried. Even if it costs us everything, some things are worth more than money. His father squeezed his shoulder. I haven't been much help these past years, but I know what integrity looks like. I see it in you, working night after night on this. As his father shuffled back to the house, Ethan made his decision. He tore Whitaker's check in half. Until dawn, he worked feverishly, completing the final touches on the restoration. He installed the rebuilt carburetor, adjusted the timing, and carefully replaced the evidence in its hidden compartment. As sunrise painted the eastern sky, Ethan turned the ignition. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life, a sound not heard in over 70 years. The sound carried across the fields, into town, announcing to all that history had awakened. It also carried to the convoy of military vehicles already moving toward the Miller farm. The military jeep's engine roared to life for the first time in decades, echoing through the dusty barn. 17-year-old Ethan Miller froze, wrench still in hand, as headlights swept across the weathered walls. Outside, vehicle doors slammed. Heavy boots crunched on gravel. Through gaps in the wooden planks, he saw them uniformed men surrounding the barn, weapons visible. The lead officer pounded on the door. By order of the United States Army, open up. Ethan's heart hammered. Had restoring the Jeep been illegal after all? Was Whitaker right about stolen property? With trembling hands, he slid the barn door open. A dozen uniformed personnel stood in formation. At their center, a distinguished officer with silver hair and 5 stars on his shoulder stepped forward. Ethan Miller? I'm General Thomas Carter. We need to discuss that vehicle. Ethan's father emerged from the house, shuffling to stand beside his son. What's going on? Robert Miller demanded, more forceful than he'd been in months. Sir, we're here about Captain James Harrison's Jeep, the general replied, and the evidence it contains. Frank, Joe, and Henry's trucks skidded into the driveway. The veterans hurried toward the gathering, but military personnel respectfully intercepted them. It's all right, the general called to them. Operation Homecoming is authorized. Frank visibly relaxed at these words, nodding to Ethan. The general turned back to Ethan. You've been restoring a vehicle of significant historical importance, one that disappeared in 1944, along with evidence of wartime profiteering. Another car approached, Whitaker's luxury SUV. He stepped out, face contorted with rage. This is private property, he shouted. These people are trespassing with stolen military equipment. Harold Whitaker, the general acknowledged coldly. We've been expecting you. 2 military police officers moved toward Whitaker as another officer handed the general a folder. Harold Whitaker, we have evidence linking you to the disappearance of Captain James Harrison in 1944, the theft of military supplies valued at over $12 million in today's dollars, and the obstruction of a military investigation. Whitaker's face drained of color. That's absurd. Any evidence is fabricated and well past any statute of limitations. There is no statute of limitations on wartime treason, the general replied. And the evidence is quite authentic, preserved in that Jeep by Captain Harrison himself. As Whitaker was escorted to a military vehicle, the general approached the barn, examining the restored Jeep with professional appreciation. Remarkable work, he told Ethan. Our restoration experts couldn't have done better. How did you find us? Ethan asked. The veterans contacted an old Army buddy, my father, the general explained. When he realized this connected to the Harrison case, things moved quickly. We've had Captain Harrison's file flagged for decades. A silver-haired man in civilian clothes emerged from one of the vehicles. Though in his 70s, his military bearing was unmistakable. This is Thomas Harrison, Jr., the general said, Captain Harrison's son. The man approached Ethan slowly, emotion evident in his eyes. My father vanished before I was born, he said, voice thick. All my life, I've searched for answers. You've helped bring them home. Thomas Harrison ran his hand reverently over the Jeep his father had driven. The military would like to acquire this vehicle and the evidence for our museum, the general explained. With full recognition of your restoration work, we're prepared to offer fair compensation. How fair? Robert Miller asked practically. The general handed over a document. Ethan's eyes widened at the figure. enough to save the farm, pay off medical bills, and fund his college education. Additionally, the general continued, "We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our engineering program. Your restoration skills are exactly what our historical division needs." As dawn broke fully across the farm, military photographers documented the Jeep, while Thomas Harrison embraced the veterans who had served with his father. Ethan stood beside the vehicle, still processing how a simple act of restoration had uncovered long-buried truth and justice. "Why did you do it?" Thomas Harrison asked him quietly. "Restore the Jeep when selling it would have been easier." "Because," Ethan replied, "some things deserve to be remembered." 6 months later, Ethan stood in the National Military History Museum beside the gleaming Jeep. A permanent exhibition, Captain Harrison's Last Mission, told the story of supply theft, investigation, and the evidence preserved for decades. A separate plaque honored Jack Miller, who had secretly transported the vehicle home after the war, and Ethan, whose restoration had finally brought the truth to light. Harold Whitaker had pled guilty to lesser charges, his reputation destroyed, his empire crumbling as former associates distanced themselves. The testimonies of the elderly veterans, combined with Harrison's preserved evidence, had proven damning despite the passage of time. Ethan now divided his time between engineering classes and weekend work at the museum's restoration department. He wore a workshop badge reading "Historical Vehicle Specialist" with quiet pride. The Miller farm was thriving. With the military's payment, they'd modernized equipment, expanded operations, and hired help. Robert Miller's health had improved with access to specialized treatments, his good days now outnumbering the bad. "Ready for the presentation?" asked Thomas Harrison, now a regular visitor. Ethan nodded, straightening his tie. Today, the museum was unveiling a new audio-visual display where visitors could hear the Jeep's engine, the sound Ethan had brought back to life. The ceremony drew a crowd. Frank, Joe, and Henry sat in places of honor. Gus's daughter attended with her family. Even some of Ethan's former classmates, who had once mocked him, came to see his accomplishment. "This vehicle represents more than military history," the museum director told the gathered crowd. "It represents how ordinary people, a farm boy with a wrench, an elderly hardware store owner, veterans who never forgot their fallen brother, can preserve truth across generations." As applause filled the hall, Ethan stepped back, letting others take the spotlight. His gaze drifted to a newly installed photograph beside the exhibition, Captain James Harrison, standing proudly beside his Jeep in 1944. Beneath it hung another photo taken just weeks ago, Ethan, the veterans, and Thomas Harrison, with that same restored vehicle. "Some restorations take more than mechanical skill," the caption read. "They require heart." Outside the museum windows, other vintage military vehicles awaited their turn for restoration. Ethan Miller was ready. Some things were worth saving, no matter how long it took. That's the end of today's story. If you were in Ethan's position, would you have taken Whitaker's money or restored the Jeep? Let me know in the comments. Hit subscribe for more stories that reveal unexpected heroism. Watch our next video to discover another hidden act of courage.